Hi, everyone. I feel like I've become disillusioned as time has gone on. I used to think that everyone had a basic grasp of basic logic. And I think when I first started to notice that I was incorrect about that was when I joined Facebook. And I could see the sort of miscellaneous ramblings of people. And I would start to see a bit of a problem here. The things that they would talk about were not very well reasoned. And maybe it could be forgiven because they're just sort of off the cuff things. And there are many times when I catch myself in a bit of a logical conundrum. And keep in mind, I'm not talking about some sort of academic understanding of logic, formal logic. I'm not formally trained in any of these things at all. I'm talking about what I would, what would be euphemistically called common sense. In this sense, common would mean basic, a basic grasp of basic logic. And as time has gone on and I've read a lot of different comments and blog posts and watched a lot of YouTube videos and other things where people have tried to make arguments, a case for one thing or another, I've seen a lot of these logic problems. And I think it's often compounded by an unwillingness to sort of be introspective or to, honestly challenge your own ideas. I think the honest thing to do is to, if you have an idea, a concept, to spend a lot of time with it. Spend a lot of time accessing information to the contrary. Spend a lot of time doing thought experiments in your own head, bouncing ideas off of other people. A willingness to make sure that you're correct about these things. But even the basic logic doesn't really require that. A basic logic, all it takes is for you to just go through the process and make sure that you're being consistent and that sort of thing. I mean, that's why I made the video recently about religiosity and rationality and that sort of thing, because I think it's very important that we don't lose our critical thinking, that we don't lose reason in the pursuit of any particular aim or goal. And so I was made aware of a bit of recent drama spurred on by this recent kidnapping in Chicago of the white handicapped person by 4 black teenagers, or actually, I don't think they are teenagers. Some of them are in their 20s. And a blog post by someone by the name of Gazi Kodzo, who otherwise goes, I think he goes by the name Black Hitler. He's a member of a black socialist party, something like that. And the reason it's controversial is because this person has come out in support of these 4 black people kidnapping this person. And his reasoning presents a real problem. And the reason that I bring this up is because this guy does have a following. This guy does have a lot of people supporting him. And this is race baiting extraordinaire. It's extremely poorly reasoned, but it's kind of a sophist type argument. In other words, it's appealing to people who don't have a good firm grasp on logic and reason. It sounds good. It sounds reasonable to that group of people. And this kind of stuff can motivate people into action. And that's the fear here, of course, is that the race baiting by the media and by other people, based on, again, this collectivist idea, and this we're going to go through that with this particular comment, can spur people into doing things, attacking other people, attacking innocent people. And I think the fact that this white person that was attacked is mentally handicapped really lays bare the problem with this collectivizing of human experience, human responsibility for actions and that sort of thing. Because in this case, we're completely collectivizing only the race of the individual. And we're placing upon him all the evil and malevolence that we are deeming to be the responsibility of that collective. But the problem, again, being that this person is mentally handicapped, is a person can only be responsible, morally responsible, if they have the cognitive capacity, the mental faculties to make reasoned adult decisions. That's the only way you can hold them responsible, is if they're capable of being responsible. And this Gazi Kodzo, I watched about a half of another video of his where he asks the question, black people torturing white people, and he goes on to complain about slavery, institutional slavery and that sort of thing. He dismisses the notion that this guy was handicapped. I don't know how you could know. If a person is someone who we wouldn't trust to run a business, or potentially can't even get a driver's license, then we can't necessarily reason that he's going to be capable of the kind of complex thought process that it takes to make decisions on the big moral issues to be then held responsible for them. the point was made, I think somebody made it, they said fuck Donald Trump because he expressed some support for Donald Trump. He likely can't even vote. Let's go through this comment by Gazi Kodzo, and we'll see where the moral problems, the logic problems exist, and of course, by extension, the moral ones. Now, he starts right off by collectivizing experience, as though he himself has been somehow tortured and kidnapped. He says, we have been kidnapped and tortured for over 500 years. I support these 4 African teenagers. I don't know why he saw fit to call them teenagers. So again, he's collectivizing experience. Obviously, this has not happened to him. If you see his videos, he's pretty flamboyant. He doesn't exhibit any sufficient trauma, and he clearly hasn't been. Or if he had been kidnapped and tortured, I would hope that he would have contacted the authorities. But what he's doing is collectivizing the black experience. And so that's important to keep in mind as we go further. The United States government, which was built by kidnapping and torture of millions of Africans, does not have a moral foot to stand on to judge these 4 African teenagers. So by extension, we can gain a couple of things. He is saying that he does have a moral foot to stand on to judge these 4 teenagers. He's also, I think, somehow acting as though the U.S. government determines morality, and he's saying basically, well, no, they don't, because they have been inconsistent. Consistency is a key principle here. For any of these moral principles to have any meaning, they have to be universalized, they have to be applicable to all people, and they have to be consistent. You can't make special rules for some special person just because arbitrary special rules. Consistency is important, or you lose all credibility. The U.S. government is not responsible for morals, ethics. They don't determine what is moral. They try to identify it. And the evidence of that, of course, is that we've had an evolution of law where we've come to realize that a certain thing, a given thing, may not have been moral. And whatever the current law is, it is our current attempt to have our law reflect our morality, reflect the reality of objective morality. And so, quick thought experiment, if the U.S. government dissolved tomorrow, would that mean there would be no morality? Morality does not exist. There's a moral vacuum, and we don't have any morality until a new government comes along? No, of course not. So we can remove the U.S. government from the picture. That doesn't dictate whether or not the act that these 4 teenagers or 4 black people perpetrated was moral or immoral. That doesn't determine it, but he's attempting here to dismiss claims that this was an immoral act by utilizing what he sees as the lack of consistency within the U.S. government. Now, keep in mind, there's a difference, in consistency. There's a temporal importance here, right? It's one thing to say, well, my views are inconsistent with what they were 10 years ago. Well, I've evolved, I've changed, we all change. U.S. law changes, and that's a key point, I think, for later, this evolution of morality. It's another thing entirely to say, maybe 10 minutes ago I said one thing and now I say something completely different than that, or within the same blog post, right? There's a temporal relationship here with consistency. Don't be ashamed of the act these 4 Africans committed. Understand it. We are tired of being oppressed, terrorized, humiliated, and killed. You can only push a people so far. Until African peoples are free, acts like these will continue to happen. So, on the one hand, this person is declaring that kidnapping and torture are immoral. By extension, by saying we have been kidnapped and tortured and you've pushed us too far, we're tired of being terrorized, he's attempted to dismiss the immorality of what these 4 people did to an arguably innocent person. Innocent, if by no other means than the fact that he is incapable of the rational thought necessary to be held responsible morally for the results of his decisions. So, by extension, he's saying African people were innocent and they were unfairly tortured and kidnapped. But it's okay to torture and kidnap this innocent person. The lack of consistency, the lack of ability to logic, the lack of the ability to process this in terms of the individual. And he also, of course, is collectivizing not only the black experience, but the black attitude. And I would say this, I would hope, and I'm pretty certain, that the majority of black people do not condone this action. And they are morally, they're outraged that someone would have this kind of attitude about it as well, this kind of attitude of support, as though this somehow justifies this. You see, I rail against this collectivizing of people based on arbitrary metrics, but there's a different kind of collective that is far more important. It's far more informative to us. It actually does allow us to make judgments about people, because these collectives are made by choice. Their membership in a group, their membership in a profession, their membership of a belief in a certain type of ideology. These are voluntary memberships in a collective. So we could consider there to be moral collectives. This person, this Gazi Kodzo, apparently is a member of the moral collective that says, moral collective that says vigilante justice is acceptable, etc., etc. That it's okay to an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of a thing. And that it doesn't even really matter so much who you perpetrate that against. If you've had a wrong done to you, it's acceptable then for you to just seek whatever kind of vengeance you like upon the most convenient and available victim that you can find, whether or not they are personally responsible. And what he's attempting to do is to drag all black people, the collective black people, the racial collective, into his moral collective. And I have a feeling that many of them would reject this soundly, because many of them belong to the moral collective that says vigilante justice is immoral, and that no act of violence or coercion against an innocent person can be justified, even by former acts of violence perpetrated against yourself or people like you that lived hundreds of years ago or whatever. This is why, again, this collectivizing of human experience and human attitudes is so dangerous. It's because it allows people to make excuses. So these four black people were utilizing this collective, fuck white people idea to justify their acts of violence against this mentally handicapped person. Gazi Kodzo is using the very same concepts to justify his support for those people. Even in the face of seeing how much it's been rejected by society at large, including the vast majority of black people. How this guy, the arrogance of thinking that you can speak for your entire race. Unbelievable. But that's the irrationality of this type of collective, the involuntary collective. This completely irrational concept. And it leads to further polarization. It leads to friction and dissent. And it will never lead us to any kind of racial harmony, for sure. The last thing I want to say on this video, and I apologize if this seems rambling, I'm just trying to get my thoughts out there. These are all just my thoughts and opinions. I really do appreciate all the comments that are always left below, even though I don't always get a chance to respond to them. I really do appreciate them. I read them all, just so you all know. And when I get an opportunity, I will sometimes reference specific comments in a follow-up video. This idea of holding people responsible in the now, in the today, for things that were done by people who aren't them in the distant past, or even the semi-recent past. This idea of, obviously, slavery and torture and colonialism and that sort of thing. First of all, the assumption is sort of made, it's inherent in the narrative that those people were completely innocent and they were never harmful to one another or to other people, or they wouldn't have taken the opportunity to invade, if they had that convenience and opportunity, etc., etc. The narrative is sort of that only the oppressors that we can identify were the violent and ill, malevolent force, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say the barbarism of humanity is not a racial problem. It's a human problem. We have evolved. That's the whole point of this, is that we have evolved. There's been an evolution, and we've had a moral evolution. And it's interesting because you can see that if you look across the world today. There are different stages of our moral evolution. And if you happen to believe, as I do, in an objective morality, and I'm not talking about Ten Commandments type of morality, I'm not talking about a set of ethics that are handed down from a superior being. I'm talking about a set of ethics that can be rationally derived in the same way that we utilize math to explain the relationship of objects in the real world. Our objective morality, our secular objective morality, is just a system that we use to describe the relationship and the impact of peoples on one another. And you can see these different levels of morality across the planet. You can also see it, again, temporally. You can see that over time, there are things today that we find morally reprehensible that were once considered completely acceptable, if not necessary. And I don't think that it's reasonable to hold the moral beings of today somehow responsible for the moral decisions of lesser evolved beings of yesterday. It's one thing to say to someone, these are the things we know today. For instance, a good example might be corporal punishment. There's a science to this. There are things we know about the effects of spanking on children. And if someone is spanking their children today, and I know I'll probably get tons of backlash for this, but you're wrong. If there's someone who's spanking their children today, they're doing so in spite of the current science on the matter, what we know. So that's different than going back in time to a period of time when slavery and many other practices were considered not only moral, but, not only acceptable, but moral, and expecting them with the knowledge they didn't have at the time to behave as though they did have that knowledge at the time. We have evolved. And it's likewise, not proper, I don't think, to hold someone today accountable who behaves morally based on these principles with the knowledge they have at the time to somehow be responsible for those people who didn't have that knowledge at the time, hadn't evolved to that degree. That makes no sense. That's a completely immoral idea on its face. Now, it should go without saying, but I feel like I have to say it anyway, that I am personally disgusted by a lot of the historical injustices that we've had as a species. I'm disgusted by slavery. I'm disgusted by the barbarism that humankind has been capable of. I'm disgusted by the experience of Canadian Native peoples in residential schools and all of that. The important point to keep in mind here is that the same kind of collectivism, the collectivizing of attitudes and experience and quality of human beings, was used to justify those very things in those times that is being used in this case, in this instance, to justify the abuse of a mentally handicapped person or just anyone who shares that racial component. The reason I say that it should go without saying is because these things, these attitudes are repudiated on a massive scale in the West. Nobody... You're not a popular person if you, in 2017, support the idea of slavery or the idea of white supremacy, Aryan supremacy or something like that. You're certainly not going to be real popular in Canada if you come out in support of the residential schools of the past. These ideas are repudiated. But the current backlash against white people for these historical oppressions is not so in the shadows. This is the common narrative in high academe, for instance, nowadays, and it's somewhat supported. There's a lot of backlash, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot more support for it. These people feel emboldened in collectivizing in the same way that gets people killed, that gets people tortured, based on nothing else than these common arbitrary metrics that make them part of these identity politics collectives. It's very dangerous stuff. At some point, I was saying to my wife yesterday, I don't understand it because this is just this is basic empathy. I would not want this done to me. I can understand if I am taking a chunk out of some guy's scalp, how is it that I remove myself from that equation and I don't put myself, it's not about, it sounds selfish. It's not about hoping that doesn't happen to me. It's about putting myself in his position, having that compassion of, oh my God, I can't do this to this person. Because I know what it would be like if it were done to me. I'm not going to do this because I don't want someone else to do it to me. I don't want to do this because I can understand how awful it would be. And this collectivizing of people based on arbitrary metrics allows people to excuse this stuff. We've demonized each other as human beings far too long. We've demonized this group or that group far too long. It's time to start treating people as individuals. When you meet somebody, you treat them well. If they don't treat you well in return, then you respond differently. But you don't make assumptions about them the first time you meet them, based on things that you can tell from 250 feet away. Thanks for watching.